With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Ayin Beis. It's going to be a Daf of Agadata. We left off in the middle of a Braisa that was speaking about how many strands were in each thread in various Big Day and in other Kalim that was used in the Mishkan. Big Day Kahuna and Kalim meaning the Paroiches, etc., that we have in the Mishkan. Also, just to repeat that based on the Alpi Chasidis, that begodim are connected to Machshava Dibur Umaisa, which is really the avoid of all of the Tayyag, the majority of the Tayyag mitzvahs. It makes so much sense that every beged should be comprised of many, many details. And as the Alter Rebbe says, that in as much as that if a person, God forbid, violates an Isur for which there is Kares, so then Yaakov Chevel Nachalosei, so then the entire cord, so to say, on a certain level is completely severed. Always we can do tshuva, but on a certain level it's severed. That if a person violates many, many mitzvahs, the same thing happens. Because of the Alter Rebbe explains, every mitzvah is a little thread, is a little chevel that is connecting us to God. This is no doubt very intimately connected with our sugya. Now we were in middle of the explanation and the expounding upon the Braisa. We are on the last line on Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis. We're learning about the Me'il, and we're going to go over that. The Me'il has 12 strands in each thread. The Paroiches and the Choshen and the Ephod. From there, we're going to go into the Isur of tearing Big Day Kahuna. And from Big Day Kahuna, we're going to go and speak a lot about the Aron. So first, we're going to be speaking about the Isur of removing the poles from the rings in the Aron. And there is an apparent contradiction in the Psukim. And yes, we learned above that they would extend the poles Bisman Bayis Rishon when there was a curtain. So the poles should mamish go into the Paroiches, even though it did not go through the Paroiches, but one can see, so to say, the indentation from the other side that's connected to our sugya. We're going to be speaking about Atzei Shitim Oimdim, the inner meaning of it, the power of the Big Day Kahuna, and we're going to be speaking about the Aron Sha'asa Betzalel. Truth be told, that in Shkalim, I think, we had a machlokes exactly whether that Aron was comprised of 3 different boxes, or was it one box that was coated with gold from the inside and the outside. The Gemara here is not going to be addressing that latter opinion. We will be explaining the dimensions of the Aron based on the premise that the Aron, again, that Betzalel made, had 3 boxes, an inner and outermost box made out of pure gold, and the middle box, the Emtsoi, was made out of Atzi Shiftim. Now the Torah speaks about, let's say, the height of the Aron, that the height without the kapoiras was 1.5 amma. And guys, again, how many tfachim are in a amma? If you remember, sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6. We're going that the Aron, machlekes tanoim by the Aron. Our sugya is following that the Aron's dimensions is 6 tfachim to 1 amma. Which means that the height, when the Torah says that the Aron was 9 ammas tall, was an 1.5 amma tall, it means 9 tfachim tall. Which box are we referring to? We'll be speaking about here in our Gemara. Really, that means the outer dimension of the middle box, which means that when you stood outside the Aron HaKodesh, the outer box needed to be even a little bit bigger, and we'll see a machlokes in that. It was even that much or a bit taller. We're going to be learning about the Zeir, the decorative rim that came out of the top of the outermost box. How the height of the Zeir is not included in the height of the Aron Kodesh. B'chlal, we're going to have very powerful agadata about the importance that when a Yid learns Torah, it should be lishma, meaning that we should learn it for the sake of learning Torah, ultimately to draw down even more elikus in the Torah. So we're learning for the Torah, and also our learning should always be in order for us to better perform the mitzvahs and not stam to learn. And the power when we learn Torah on that level, and if we'll have time, we'll start a new sugya. Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael, as he always did, with information, with Torah, and he told us that the begadim of the Kohen Meshuach Milchama, there was a Kohen that was designated that whenever we went out to battle, he would be the one offering words of inspiration right prior to battle. He was called the Kohen that was anointed to go out to battle. So Rav Dimi says that he also wore the Shmoyne Begadim, which is a big wow, and we're not going to have time to go deeply into it, maybe just starting it, and the hemshech of that will be, God willing, tomorrow. So let us start on Daf Ayin Aleph Amid Beis, Mamish on the last line in the Amid. the Braisa that began telling us, beginning with sheish, why does the Torah call linen sheish, when linen can be called bad, and linen can be called butz, and linen can be called pishtan, is to be merames that in the Big Day Kahuna, and in the Kalim, in the Mishkan that was made with linen, every thread had 6 strands, and what's taken as a given, and therefore whenever there were other materials or other fibers used in the making of the begadim and of the kalim, but it also means it had at least that amount. So when the Torah speaks about the pareiches, we mentioned that the pareiches was made out of linen, tcheles, argaman, and toila shani. Just for the sake of clarity, tcheles and argaman and toila shani are the colors that we would dye the wool. They were all made out of wool. Chalazin and argaman, right, we spoke about, Tcheles and Argaman we spoke about came from the Chilazin, but the blood of the Chilazin sometimes remains blue, sometimes turns into purple. And Toila Shani, there was a certain worm from where they got a very deep, dark, reddish tint color. So just like the linen was one thread comprised out of 6 strands, if something was made out of linen and Tcheles, Argaman, and Toila Shani, each one was made out of 6. And then all of these 4 were twined together. So we ended up using relatively thick, beautiful, colorful threads to weave the begadim and to weave the kalim. And now we left off, the Braisa says that the me'il, the robe, which was one of the shmoina begadim of the Kohen Gadol, each thread was comprised out of 12 strands. Says the Gemara, Minalan, how do we know that? So since the Chsiv, I'm quoting a pasuk in Parshas Tetzaveh, regarding the making of the Big Day Kahuna, including the Big Day Kohen Gadol. V'asisa es me'il ha'ephod, you shall make the robe of the ephod. In other words, the ephod, just to know, was tied over the me'il. Today, we have these beautiful chumashim, even the chayenus that give all these pictures that mamash, a picture is worth 1,000 words. To see, pashad, the begadim, to understand how the ephod was connected and tied to the me'il. The Torah refers to the me'il as the garment upon which the ephod was tied, daf ayin beis on the top. So kelil techeres, now the word kelil, important, means braided of tcheles. Braided means that every thread was already comprised out of 2, for it to be at least braided. I know that sometimes you can have a braid out of 3 when you make challah, but at least 2. So we're going to go, now the question is, how much does each one of those 2 have? So now we say, since it says tcheles, and v'yalav tcheles mi paroiches, just like by paroiches, we said that the total amounts of strands in each thread were 24. How did we get to the 24? Because the paroiches was made out of sheish, was made out of linen, and tcheles, argaman, and toila shani. And each one has 6. Which means that the tcheles in there had 6, right? Everything was consistent. So afkan, just like the paroiches, each one had 6. Here also, by the me'il, each one had 6. And the Torah says, klil tcheles. The word klil is not written by the paroiches. Klil means that it is braided. Braided means at least 2, for you to, to braid them together. 6 times 2 is 12. Frek Gemara, hold on. Why are we comparing the tcheles from the me'il to the me'il from the paroiches, v'neilaf mishulav v'rimainav, the hem attached to the me'il, and then subsequently the remainim that we just spoke about. Here we have a great picture, right? The decorative adornment pomegranates that were attached to the bottom of the robe. We just learned above, we proved that those threads, the tcheles thread, was comprised of 8 strands. So why don't we say malahal and shmoina, afkan shmoina, and then it should be a total of 16, right? The tcheles, each one 8, and it should be keliled. Says the Gemara, no, that done in keli mikeli, right? The robe is a utensil. Interestingly, the curtain is called a keli. How was the curtain called a keli? Because whenever we would travel, the curtain was also used, so to say, to contain some of the klei hamishkan. So it mamish became a receptacle while we were traveling. So they are more similar. Ve'ein done in keli, which is what we're learning about the me'il, from what we call a tachshit keli, right? An ornament, which is exactly what the rimaynim are, right? They embellish the robe, but they're not the keli, they're not the robe proper. Says the Gemara, Adarabba, why don't we say done in gufay mi gufay? you want to know how many strands went into each thread in the robe, learn from another part of the robe, which are diremoinim. The ein danen gufay ma'alma. Ma'alma means from some place out there, which would be the curtain, the paroiches. So the Gemara answers, no. Hainu de amrinan. When we began the Baraisa, that the word sheish is written 5 times when it only needed to be written once. So there are really 4 extra words sheish. And the Baraisa mentioned that l'sha'ar begadim shaloi nemer behem sheish. That extra word sheish is megala, that it's always 6. It's referring exactly to the me'il. In other words, how do we know how many strands are in each one before you kilil it? 6. 6 times 6 is 12. Weiter, it says in the Baraisa that the Paroiches was comprised of Esrim Varba'a, which is, as we already spoke out. So Dalid, because there were 4 different types of threads, like we said, linen, tcheles, argaman, and toilashani. Each one, the shita, each one at 6. 6 times 4 is 24. And this is something so pashut, the Gemara says, that loidina v'loidaina. This requires no judgment, this requires no judge. As Allah and Gemara, right, this is undisputable. Pashut. Next, choshen and the ephod, each thread comprised the max amount of strands, and they are esrim v'shmoina. They had 28. Frek the Gemara minolan. How do we get to the 28? Answers the Gemara because it says in Parshas Tetzava v'asisa choshen mishpat. Maisei choshev, a work of craftsmen. We're going to be learning more on Amud Beis. Sometimes the Torah says Maser Roikem, sometimes it says Maisei choshev. We'll see more details, but generally choshev means someone who's a mumcha. Kemaisei ephod ta'asenu, and it should be made like the ephod, which is that in the threads and the fibers there should be gold. Now we're adding another one, a side of the 4. Now we're having 5. Gold. And cheles, and argaman, and toilashani, and sheish, mashazar, right? You have a twined linen. So now we already established. Arba'a, the shita, they'll take out zav. The other 4, like the paroiches, beginning with the sheish, right? 6 times 4 is 24. Then the Torah begins to say that you have to put gold into it, that they would take a certain type of gold, they would beat it into very thin sheets, and then they would slice, they would cut the sheets, and that would become golden strands. And the Gemara is saying that here they didn't take 6 golden strands and twirl them together like they did in the other fibers. No. They put 1 golden strand each side, the other 4. So when they were making 1 thread out of, let's say, the tcheles, so they would begin with 6 strands of tcheles plus 1 of gold. Which 1 of gold was added in the 4. So if you already have 24 and now you have another 4, so that's 28. Za'av arba'a ha'esrim v'tamyo. Asks the Gemara. Now that's the question. If every time the Torah mentions a type of thread, we are saying that each thread comprised of 6 strands. Maybe gold is the same thing. So you're going to have 30, right? You're going to have another 2. The Amos of Namas Shisha. So we have like this. Amar Avacha bar Yaakov, no. Because since the Torah says, now we're going from the Pasuk in Tetzava that mentions gold, we're going now to Pekudei, where it says Vikitzeitz Pesilim, and they should, the Pasuk begins again that they should beat the gold into a plate. And then it says Vikitzeitz Pesilim, and you should cut it into strands. The plate was cut into strands. Now, if the Torah would have said the word Psil, Lashon Yachid, it would have meant 1. Psilim means 2. Cutting means you double the 2. You cut the 2 into 4. So there's an emes that there's 4. Now, whether the 4 were standalone or whether they were inserted in the other 4, which they were, he's not even focusing on that. He just wants to prove that by the gold we have a emes that there wasn't 6, there were 4. So you have 24 plus 4 is 28. Rav Ashi says, I don't even need that. Because if you continue reading the pasuk over there, it says, Lasois betoich hatcheles ubetoich wargaman. In other words, the gold was not a standalone thread. The gold strips were inserted in each side, inside each one of the above 4. Now, there are 4 other types. So exactly how many would you put in each one. We're trying to explain how there could not have been more than 28. In other words, 1 in each one. Heicha navid. Are you going to tell me, navid, arba'a, that in each one of the 4, tcheles, argaman, toilashani, and the sheish, you would put in each one the trei, right? It says psilim, at least 2. So 2, and if that would be the pshat, well, 2 times 4 is 8. Havaluhu tamnia. So you're not going to have a consistent. Don't tell me it should be 6. It's not going to be like everything else. Trei. So if you want to say like this, by 2 of the, let's say, tcheles and the argaman, you should put in those 2 of gold, and vitrei, the chad, you're trying to get to the 6, and then let's say in the toilashani and in the sheish, there you would only put in 1 strand of gold. So it would be very nice. You would end up with a total of 6 strands of gold, but that doesn't work, because ve'asisa, says the Torah, which means shiyu kol asiyosav shavos. We want for there to be a consistency in the making of the garments, and we don't want that in some of the fibers you have 2 threads of gold and then 2 1. So the only way for it to be consistent and for you not to go over the 6 is by putting 1 strand of gold inside each one. So you have 24 plus in each one of gold. That is the max that we had. That is that every larger thread that Ersht was used in the weaving process was comprised of 28 strands. Amar Achava, Amar Rav Yehuda. Ha-mikoreya bigdei kahuna. If you tear the bigdei kahuna, you're chayiv malchus. Again, al pi chasidus, we're speaking about that, many, what we might call little mitzvahs, they make the big cord. Even ripping any part of it, you're chayiv malchus. Shenemar, as it says in Tetzava, lo yikoreya. Now this pasuk is really speaking about how they would open up a hole in the neck of the me'il through which the Kohen Gadol would put his face, and they would make a hem inside that opening for that not to get torn. But we are applying it b'chlal, that all the bigdei kahuna may not be torn, and if one did so, yechayiv malchus. Maskiv lo Rav Acha bar Yaakov. How do you know that this pasuk is exactly telling you that there's a lav? Dilma hachi k'amar achmana. Maybe the Torah is saying regarding a mitzvah of how to make the begadim, like we mentioned, when you make the me'il, the robe, which had an opening in its center through which to put the face, right, the neck. Navid lo safa, the Torah says, make a hem for it not to become torn. But how do you know that if someone tears it, they're violating a lav? So the Gemara answers, because it doesn't say that you should make a safa, a hem, shelo yikoreya, so that it will not tear. No, the Torah says, lo yikoreya, it shall not be torn. So it has a double meaning. Taka, you made the hem for it not to tear, but this is a lav on any of the bigdei kahuna that we may not do something that will tear any of the begadim. And very similar to that, Amar Rabbi Lazar, Hameziach choishen malo ephod, whoever will loosen the choishen from the ephod, it should have been attached tightly, even only loosening it. Or vahamesir badei aron, if a person will take out the poles from the rings in the aron kodesh, also loikem, because by the choishen it says lo yizach, it shall not be detached. So here again, the same back and forth. The pshat is that you connect the choishen tightly so it shouldn't get detached. But the drush is, no, don't do an action that will detach it. And likewise, by the aron where it says, place the bottom inside the rings, it says, v'lo yosuru, means it shall not depart, means you may not remove it. Maskav lo Rav Acha bar Yaakov, the same type of question, no. V'dilma ki ka'amar achmana, all the Torah means by the choshen is, chatkinuhu v'avdinu shapir, that you should properly tighten it. You should sew it together, so it shouldn't, it shouldn't be loose. But it doesn't mean that you are not allowed to be yadayim loosen it, and if you do so, you're chayiv malchus. Kedei shelo yizach, and the same thing, that you should place the poles inside the aron in a way, as we'll learn details, that they made the outer parts of the poles a little bit thicker than the inner parts, even though all of it would fit through the rings. But it was made in a way where it's difficult to fully remove it. Maybe make it in a way where it should not depart. But who says it means that there's a law? God is saying, don't do it, and if you do it, you're going to be chayiv malchus. So here again, there's no shin. Answers the Gemara, miksiv shelo yizach. Then it only would have meant sew it tightly so it should not get loose. It doesn't say shelo yusuru, make the poles in a way where it becomes difficult for it to depart. No, the Torah uses the same statement without a shin, which is also leaves itself open for interpreting it not only on how to make it, but future oriented, that we may not do an action that will loosen it or that will remove it. And indeed, Rabbi Yossi ben Rab Chanina points out the following stira. Rami, Ksiv, it says in Truma, Betaba ois ha'aron yiu abadim, lo yusuru mimenu. Right, in the rings of the aron should be the poles, it shall not depart. But it says, now really the Bach amends the pasuk that we are quoting, because this contradiction has to be from a pasuk connected to the poles, and he quotes the pasuk also in Truma, where it says, "Vehevesa es habadim batabois." You should bring the badim into the rings, which imply that prior to that they were not in it. And we understand this pasuk not only to be for the first time. It's like there's a constant mitzvah to bring them in. That means that it can go out and then you bring it back in. So ha'ketzad, so he explains that misparkin ve'ein nishmatin, they may be loose. They were actually made loose, which allowed you to maneuver them, but never to fully remove them. And how do you do that? So the part of the pole that is more towards its center, that was something that the thickness of the circumference was smaller. It was skinnier, which means that the rings did not, let's say, hug it. So it was relatively easy to move. And again, like we mentioned, there was an inyan to have it protruding out the paroiches. We could have moved it around. But what was never allowed was to fully remove it. Now, it's not that they were so thick at the edges that they were unremovable, because then how would they put them in? And by the way, we had such a nes in the Mishkan. But this was not a nes. And it was made in a way where putting in the edges needed a lot of koyach, but it remained loose, and we were allowed to move it around a little bit back and forth. Very good. Tanya nami hachi. It says bitabois ha'aron yiu habadim. So Yachol, see in the Yachol, it's in the picture that he just showed. It was all the same, and just at the end there was like this bulb. Lav dafka. It seems like it was more. It in a very in a consistent way. It went from skinny to thicker as you went to both edges. Yachol lo yiu zazen b'mekayim. You would think that they should be made in a way that they're so tight in the rings that they are mamish unmovable without a lot of koyach? No. So that's the pasuk that we brought, the hevesas habadim batabois, that the pole should be inserted, which implies that you can move them around. Now, can you move them around to the point that you can fully remove them? No. Talmud leimer betabois ha'aron yiu habadim ha'ketzad, that they were made purposefully misparkin, but ve'ein nishmatin. And as the Rebbe speaks out, that why did we always have to leave the poles in the Aron HaKodesh? After all, once the Aron Kodesh was brought to the Bayis Rishon, to the Kodesh HaKodshim, it never left there. Or maybe you can say it left there by King Yeshayahu, but it wasn't that we were moving it around the way we did it prior to that. So the concept is that Torah, the sheet of the Rebbe Ufaratzta, that there is a source of Kedusha, and of course it would be nice if all the Yidden would come to the Torah, but the Torah always has to be in the Aron HaKodesh, and the Aron HaKodesh has to always be with its poles, which means it's always movable, in order for those of us who have the schus to be always readily available to bring the Torah to the people. What's the meaning of the pasuk in Truma? Atzei shitim oimdim. What do you mean oimdim? Atzei shitim, cedar wood. Pshat standing. Many pshatim in the oimdim. Number one is oimdim derech gedilasan, that they would stand upright just as they grew. Rashi says, in other words, you needed to remember that when it was still connected to the ground, whichever part of the wood was higher up, so when you made the pillars, the shittim, the atzei shittim, they had to be stood on that same, the higher stayed higher, the lower remained lower. Moededik. Davar achar, another pshat, that oimdim meaning shemamidim es sipoyam, that they supported their gold plating. Just to understand, the gold plating that went on top of the atzei shittim wasn't this huge sheet of gold. It was like tiles of gold. and they were affixed on top of the atzei shittim. Now, if the atzei shittim ever would have gotten a little bit wormy or a little bit weak, then it would be unable to support the gold. So they were always supporting the gold that went around it. And davar acher, same line, even more, that oimdim means shem atoimer, lest a person say, especially after the parts of the Mishkan that were not incorporated in the temple, they were hidden. And hidden means they were nignas, they were buried. You put wood in the ground, it decomposes. So Shem HaToimer Avat Sivram, that their promise is gone. The Atzei Shittim, Maisi Yedei Moshe, what they represented, especially we learned the Midrash that Rashi brings, that came from cedar trees, that they were planted in Mitzrayim by Yaakov, who brought it from Eretz Yisrael. So they came with a promise, they came with a hope. And now that we don't see them begashmias, someone might think that Avat Sivram, that their promise is gone. Ubatal Sikuyim, and their hope is ruined. So Talmud Leimer, the Torah says they are oimdim, meaning oimdim lo'olam u'lo'olamim, that the Maisa Moshe Nitzchiyim, and all of the parts of the Mishkan, and even not the gold that doesn't decay, even the wood that's buried in the ground will remain and will exist forever, as will the promise and the hope that they share with all of us. Says the Gemara Vayter, V'amar Rab Chaim bar B'chanina, Ma'idechsiv, what's the meaning of the pasuk in Vayakel? As big day hasrod l'shareis b'kodesh, right? We're making as asach hakoil the garments of the surad, right? To serve in the kodesh, to serve in the sanctuary. What's pshat surad? Af ayin beis amid beis. That ilmole big day kahuna, they are also. They have a message, and that is that if not for the big day kahuna, what's not for the big day kahuna, says Rashi. Now here there's no Tosfos, so Rashi is on the top right. Sha'al yidei makriv makarbanos hamachaprim al Yisrael. No, it's kahuna. The big day kahuna is part of that which makes the coin into a coin. So through the big kahuna means through the avoid of karbanos. The Marsha reminds us that remember we had the machlokes whether the tzitz is machaper only when it's worn by Aharon or even when it just exists. So he says even more that the beged in itself brings atonement. If not for that, lo yishtayir misoneim shall Yisrael sodet upalit. The sodet big day hasrad is a remnant, right? That there would be no remnant nor survivor from Balashon Sagi Nahar. Misoneim shal Yisrael. No, it's to value the begodim, how they bring atonement. And again, al pi chasidus, that there is the premise of the person, right, the moichen and the midas, that there used to be times that we were really connected to God. And then can come a yid and he can think that my moichen is not connected, my midos are not the way they should be. Hamaisu hu ha'ikar. No, that's the begodim. Begodim are the levushim. That as long as the levushim are good, as long as we're doing what we need to do, even if we're not yet fully there emotionally and mentally or beruchnius, we're good. That is what saves us. Rab Shmuel bar Achmeni Yomer, that Devei Rab Shimon Tanach, we learned a Braisa Torah in the yeshiva of Rab Shimon. Big Day, another pshat of Big Day Surad, that Bigodim shegoyrdin oisam kibriyasan mikeileim, the garments that are cut off from their looms already in their required state. Now people like myself will come a little bit from a shmata background. My father had these circular machines which were phenomenal. That was a big chiddush because up until then you would have the loom. It would make a straight garment and you would cut it. But after you would cut it, you would have to sew it together. It would be just this straight piece of material, this flat piece of material. They already then. This is all mechanical. They didn't have electricity, at least not to our knowledge. But they had these machines that when you cut it off the machine, it was already rounded. It was already a full baguette, and you didn't even have to do needlework to bring it together. Mamash, whoever knows the circular machines, it was some sort of loom like that. So the moment you cut it off its loom, it's ready to go. However, he added, umisardin mehem klum, which means that some part of it was left over. So sardid is remnant, not of the Yidden. That there was one area where there was some remnant, which means some needlework needed to be done. He didn't explain what, and that needed to be trimmed away, but it was very little. And what part of the beged wasn't ready when you took it off the loom? but you needed to do some additional needlework. So Resh Lakish says, Elu Maisa Machat, it was the portion that was created through the needlework, and we'll see in a moment, and that was that the sleeves were made separately. So the only needlework that was needed was to attach the sleeves, and also the sleeves were already made rounded from the outset. It was woven from the outset that way. So they only needed to connect the sleeves with the rest of the body. And again, l'chayr al pi chasidus. In other words, the sleeves, the hands are hamaisa. The body is at least a midos. Epis, there's a disconnect. There's a disconnect from how we feel to what we do. And that needed a little bit of an avodah. An avada, in other words, that like the Rambam says, that our thoughts and our feelings should be nigrodim la'acher, it should follow our actions, because it is in the realm of our action that we have the most freedom of choice. Meisvei frek the Gemara says in a brayso, big de kahuna ein oisin maisa machat. It was not made through needlework. It was only made through maisa oireg. Shenemar, as it says in Tesava, maisa oireg. So that's the same part. You're right. In other words, the sleeves were made maisa oireg, and it was made in it was a big novelty. It was made in a way where it was already ready. The body of the garments, maisa oireg. The connection of one to the other was only by the sleeves. Kedetanya base yachal big tekahuna neregas bifnei atzma. It was woven independently, and then vinid bekesim abeged. It was then attached, and it was attached through needlework, and it was dear that tana devei Rab Shimon that they needed to umasadin mehem klum. There was a little bit of you have to scissor off the protruding threads, and umagas at pisa sayad, just to know the sleeves reached the palm of the kohen's hand, which is again significant. Hamaisu hu ikar, and not his elbows. It wasn't a short shirt. It was long. It was not long. It was all the way until the palms of his hand. Amar Rachava, Amar Rav Yehuda. The link al pi chasidus is gavaldik. If we're going to teach that the begodim represent b'chlal machshava dibur u'maisa. In the begodim themselves, you had the sleeves, the hands versus the body. Again, the amaisa versus the midos, the same is explained in Chassidus when it comes to the Aron HaKodesh. Now we are following the shita that the Aron HaKodesh was made out of 3 boxes. We're speaking about Aron She'asa B'Tzalel. 3 boxes. There was the innermost golden box, the emtsoi made out of wood, and the outer golden box. And the way the Rebbe explains it is that the inner means the Yechida, which by a Yid is gold. The outer, machshava dibur u'maisa, we have bechira, right? Potentially we can all be a beinani, that's gold. What part of the Yid is subject to change? Which is wood. Sometimes it's, when it's hot, it expands, it contracts. The changeable part in us, the fluid part in the Yid, is the moichin and the midas. Sometimes we understand more, sometimes less. Sometimes we feel more, sometimes we feel less. But what is oimed here? What stands? What holds up here in the opposite way of the atzam shittim? What will keep us standing consistently? The knowledge that my yechida is gold, and that my machshava dibur u'maisa, it's up to me, is gold. As long as that's okay, then all of the inner turmoil and struggles and ups and downs will be just fine. So Amar Achva, Amar Rav Yehuda, Shalosh aroinos asa b'tzalel. He made 3 aroinos. Not the way we learned one shita, that it was one wooden one that was simply coated from inside and outside with gold. Amtsoi was the middle one that was made out of wood. And now let's go with detailed dimensions. We're speaking here about the height, which is so significant. Right? The Rebbe always speaks about Lamata Masara Tvachim. What's this Lamata Masara Tvachim? Because the Aron HaKodesh was 10 Tvachim tall. And that's the sugya here. And normally, since the Shechina spoke from on top of the cover, Mi Bein Shnei HaKruvim, so that means the Shechina never came Lamata Masara Tvachim. That will be one of the big novelties that will happen with the coming of Mashiach. But let's go now to the height. Let's go now to the height of the Aron. So when we learn, again, it says in the Chumash that the height of the Aron was 1.5 amma tall. Based on an amma being comprised of 6 tfachim, not 5, again, subject to amachloikis. So 6, 1.5 amma is 9. But it doesn't say in the Chumash which box was that height. So that's what he's innovating. It was the middle box that was 9 ammas tall. Now, another detail, the Rashi is Gavaldik, always. The middle, I think Samach wanted to say. The middle box was 9 tfachim tall. We're speaking about the outer measurement of the middle box. That's important. Why am I saying that? Because even though the Aron did not have legs to stand on, but let's call the bottom part of the box had a thickness. And for sure, when we're focusing here on the middle one, it had the thickness of 1 tefach. Just a halt cup. So when he's saying that it had 9 tfachim height, it means if you were to measure the outer walls, which means that the inner opening was 8 tfachim. That will give us an understanding of how tall the inner golden box should be. Pnimi shel zav shmoina. That's why he adds that. No, he wants to make it clear that the middle box's bottom was a tefach thick. However, not consistently, chitzoin, the outermost golden box, again, he's focusing on its outer measurement, was asara umashahu, was 10 and a little bit. Now, how did he get to 10 and a little bit? The picture doesn't help with the dimensions, so Rashi is mamash moededik. The bottom of the outer box, according to Rachava Omar Rav Yehuda, did not have a tefach thickness. It needed to have mashahu thickness. Mashahu. So the mashahu is the mashahu. 9 tfachim kept it aligned with the same height as the emtsoi. Why was it 10? Why was it 10? Because the Torah says that the kapoides, the cover, just to have the image, the edges of the cover was not aligned with the outer walls of the outer box. The cover fit inside the edges of the outer box. And it was important for the outer box to cover the thickness of the kapoides. The kapoides was 1 tefach thick. The walls of the emtsoi was 9 tefachim thick. So to cover it all, it has to be 10 tefachim tall. 10 tefachim tall. Not only did the emtsoi and the inner emtsoi fit in it, but the cover rested in it. The mashahu is simply the amount of height of the bottom. Gewaltig. So holds Rav Yehuda. I v'hotanya, that the outer dimensions of the outermost golden box was not 10, but was 11 umashahu. Oh, now it's going to be amazing that this mashahu is not the same mashahu as above. So answers the Gemara that indeed that's a machloikis, loikasha. The question is the bottom of the outer box consistent with the middle box? If it is, so the walls of the outer box, the ganze Zach with the bottom, everything is 9 tfachim. So for you to cover it, and you need to have a bottom, if the bottom had a tefach, then how tall are the walls of the outermost box? It has to be 10, right? One tefach for the bottom, 9 to cover the emtsoi. So that's 10. And what will be the mashu is going to be the kasha. It's the mashu of Rabbi Yehuda makes sense. The mashu was the bottom, and then he said there was 9, and then 1 more to cover the kapoides. He's not even mentioning the cover. I'm sorry. You have 1. No, he's mentioning the cover. 1 for the bottom. 9 is 10, and then 1 for the cover. If yesh ba'avav tefach, then it's going to be 11 and a mashu. And ha, which is Rav Yehuda holds that ein ba'avav tefach. So now the question is, what's the mashu? This kasha is only on the Braisa. According to Rav Yehuda, the mashu is the bottom of the outer box. Now that we're saying, no, the outer of the bottom box was a full tefach and it's counted. So it's 1 tefach for the bottom. It's 9 tefachim to cover the emtsoi. So now you're up to 10. But then the kapoides, which was L'Kula Alma, inside the walls of the outermost box. And the walls needed to cover the thickness of the cover. So it was another, well, why do you have a mashu? So answers the Gemara, that mashu is taka not referring to the walls themselves, but the crown that the Torah mentions, called the zeir, right? That was a decorative rim. It was part of, and it protruded from the outer walls of the outermost box. And it had a mashahu of height. Now, Rav Yehuda also subscribes to a zayd, it's a pasuk. But when Rav Yehuda says that it had 10 and mashahu, he was not counting the zayd. It's a very also significant unspoken machlokes. The Braisa is adding the zeir, the crown, in part of, he makes it part of the outer box itself. And indeed, Amar Rabbi Yechanan, you should know that in the building of the Mishkan, Shaloisha Zeirim Heim, we find 3 crowns, 3 decorative rims by the Kilei HaMikdash, Shel Mizbeach. Chavra, let's remember, Mizbeach does not mean the outer altar. It means from the inner altar, Vishel Arayin and Vishel Shulchan, as written explicitly in the Chumash. Shel Mizbeach, now that's the drush over here. Aside of there being a physical crown on the inner Mizbeach, but that crown represents priesthood, and indeed Zacha Aharon and his descendants, Unataloi. The Zeir that Hashem says we should make on the Shulchan represents royalty, because the Shulchan is Parnasa, but wealth, gold. A golden table is something royal. It represents Malchus. Shal Shulchan Zacha David Unataloi, for him and for his descendants. And Shel Arayin, says Rabbi Yechanan, Adayin Munach, it was not taken, it's resting. No one took ownership of it. And therefore, Kol Haroitze Likach Yove V'yikach. Everyone has the same merit and opportunity to be Zoicha, the crown of Torah. And lest you think, the one that God left open for all is not as great as the prior two. Shema Toimer Pachasu, it's inferior to the Keser Kahuna, it's inferior to Keser Malchus, the opposite, says the Gemara. That's why it says in Mishlei, be through me, meaning through Torah, Melachim Yimloichum. It was all of the hashpois comes dafke through the Keser of Torah that's available for all to take. Rabbi Yechanan Rami, on the same line, that when the Torah writes about the crown, it doesn't write it Zayin Yud Reish, it's written without a Yud. So you have the Ksiv and the Kri. No, it could be read Zor, a stranger, a foreigner. Ksiv, Zor. But we know Vikarinan, Zeir. Why? Because Zacha says Rashi, that's the Rashi here on the side of Tosfos, on the right side, 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Rashi writes 2 steps. Number 1, Lil Moed Lishma, so many different interpretations of Lishma, but ultimately the way Hasidus says is that Dafke, because a Yid is mushrash in Atzmus, higher than Torah, that when we are the way we should be, and we learn Torah, we bring more godliness in the Torah. So we're learning it for the Torah. Number 2, Rashi says, Ulakaima. We're not learning it just to learn. We're learning it to fulfill it. Then Nasis Loizer, then it becomes a crown to us. But Loizacha, now many levels of Loizacha. The worst level is if a person learns Lekanter. So then Zara Himenu, then if you can learn and learn and learn, and the Torah remains estranged from the learner. Rabbi Yechanan Rami, Ksiv it says, and we're going to a pasuk in Ekev. V'asiso l'cho aroin eitz. Now this pasuk was actually Moshe Rabbeinu recording that God told him, Moshe, before going up to get the luchos the first time, God told Moshe to make an eitz, and we already learned in Shkalim, could be this was a different aron. But our sugi is not going to go with that shita that it was a different aron. So the Torah introduces an Ekev that the commandment to make the aron was given to Moshe. You have to make it. But when it says in Truma, it says ve'asu, they, the Yidden. Who was commanded? Was it an obligation personally on Moshe, or was it a communal obligation? In Truma it says ve'asu aroinatzi shitim. And again, the Marsha points out that if you're going to say there were 2 aronos, then it's perfectly answered. There was one aron that was on Moshe to make. There was another aron, right? It was made by Betzalel as our representative that was made by us. Our Gemara is not going with that. The obligation was on Moshe. And we're trying to hint that what? Mikan l'talmud chacham shebnei Iroi mitzuven lasois malach toy. God gave the commandment to Moshe. But since Bachlal, the people, the community are obligated to fulfill the needs of the Rebbe, so it's the same thing. God commands the Rebbe, and then the people do it. The people are commanded to do it because we are commanded to fulfill that which is upon Moshe Rabbeinu. Weiter, when it says regarding the Aron, mi bayis umi chutz titzapenu, that you should cover it both from the inside and from the outside. Omar Rava, called Talmud Chacham she'ein toichei kebarei, that any Talmud Chacham whose insides is not like his outsides, einoi Talmud Chacham. is not a Talmud Chacham, and not that a Talmud Chacham, but the Moichin and the Midos do fluctuate. The Pshat L'choid of Ein Toichei Kabari, if a Yid forgets about the Yechida inside himself. Because it's the golden Yechida that is going to be empowering us to actually do the right thing, to have golden actions, in spite of the fact that sometimes the middle is going to fluctuate. So we always have to be connected to the innermost part. Abaye v'teimer Rabba bar Ula Amar. That if a person, if a Talmud Chacham, right, if he just puts on a show, that's the pshat. If the outside looks amazing but the inside is not good, then Nikra Nisov, it's called loathsome. Shenamar, as it says, Af ki Nisov v'nelach. Surely it is so, because those who are loathsome and those who are tainted, the man, Shoisamayim Avla, is drinking iniquity like water. Now water is a remes for Torah. And there's a time that you can drink a lot of Torah and you're doing Avla. What's pshat? You're doing Avla, that you are giving off an appearance that is beyond of who you really are. She'ein toichai kebari. Amar Rab Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan. Ma'idich, what's the meaning in the pasuk in Mishlei, where King Solomon says, Lama zeh mechir b'yad ksil. Why is there guilt? Why is there mechil? Why is there money in the hands of a fool? In order for him to buy wisdom. When v'leiv oyin, but he lacks a good heart. This is even more. This is the heart is already the middle. In other words, there is a demand of a Talmud Chacham. That's the pshat over here. The toichai. That means that we have to also work on the midos. And if the midos are not good, then why are you acquiring the wisdom of Torah when ain't toichai kabaroi? And oil lahem l'soneim shel talmidei chachamim. Again, that's a euphemism that goes on the talmidei chachamim. That is shoiskim bat Torah, but ve'ein bahem yiras shamayim. And on this machriz Rabbi Yanai. And how powerful is this statement? Chaval, what a pity. Al the less lay darta, for those who don't have a darta. Now a darta can mean a place to live, a palace. Some people teach darta means a chutzner. So he says, Chaval, imagine someone doesn't have a courtyard, or they don't have the home, but vitaro le darta of it, but they make the gateway, they make the sha'ar. Amazing. So Chevra, the whole Torah is the gateway. The Ikir is the Yiras Shamayim, or V'leiv, Rachmana Liba Boya, Midos. That is the Ikir. Torah is the gateway. So if a person only has Torah, it's like, imagine you don't have the palace, but you have this big gateway, Yashakoyach. It's not taking you into anything. Amalu Rav Rabbanan. I beg of you, don't inherit two Gehennims. What's inheriting two Gehennims? So Rashi here on the side of Rashi, inside the Gemara, 5 lines from the top, he says that if you're going to be Yigayim and Va'amelim Ba'Torah, but you're not going to fulfill it, that's the Shaloi Lishma, you're not going to do it, you're going to get Gehennim twice. Why are you going to get Gehennim twice? Because you're going to get Gehennim for not properly fulfilling the mitzvahs. This life will be Gehennim to you because you're not going to have Olam Hazeh Torah, even by a person that's not Toichei Kebaroi. Epis, it takes away your Geshmak from Olam Hazeh. So you're going to enjoy over here, and not you're going to enjoy over there. That's the Nigla. The Hasidim of the Alter Rebbe on this Gemara made the comment that they had a different understanding. It's the Gemara is saying for thousands of years the mindset was, what is he basically saying? If you're not going to get that world, at least get this world. Like, don't be a fool, don't have double Gehennim. Hasidim used to say, and Hasidim say, Halavai we should still say from the Alter Rebbe, that if we're not getting that world, we should at least not get this world. Don't be so grub. If we're not that connected, at least stay a little bit refined over here. Okay, weiter. Omar Rabbi Shobel Levi. What's the meaning of the pasuk in Vos Chanan? We say this every time we lift the Torah. V'zois ha-Torah asher som Moshe. Oh, some, that's an interesting word, a place. Zois ha-Torah asher nasan Moshe. Zois Torahs Moshe. What's the sum? So the sin and a samach are interchangeables. Samach mem is sam. Sam is a potion. Sometimes it can be a potion of life or a potion of death. Zacha nasaloi sam chayim. Then the Torah itself, becomes a sam misa, a drug, a potion of death. And v'hainu the amarava, the first medium-sized line, de umallah. If the Torah is used skillfully, you have to know how to use it. Then it becomes sama de chaya. Like the Torah is like a gateway The Torah is going to help. So if we know how to use the Torah properly, then it becomes for us and for the people around us a drug of life. But the Yoma, then not only does it not become a drug of life, but Sama de Moisa, God forbid. The guys, I learn Torah Shaloi Lishma. Yeah, there's many levels in Shaloi Lishma, Tosfos says, but if a person is learning Torah lekanted, in other words, he's learning Torah to become contentious, to show off, or to contradict, or to show how what the Chazal say makes no sense, etc. That's the Shaloi Lishma that becomes a Sama de Moisa. Rabbi Yonasan pointed out the following contradiction. Ksiv, it says, Pekudei Hashem, the orders of God. Right, one of the words we used for mitzvahs are yisharim, they are straight, and they are mesamchei lev, they give rejoicement into the heart. However, it says in Tehillim that imras Hashem, that the words of God are tzerufa. Tzerufa means that they smelt, which is what you do when you put something in a very hot kiln, it removes impurities. So that's a painful process. I know it's removing impurities, but does it bring joy or does it smelt? Same thing, zacha misamachtoi. Loi zacha, the first widest line, then soid aftoi, then it smelts him. Rabbi Lakish says, migufa dekra nafke. No, I don't even need to point out the contradiction. Just speaking about smelting. When you smelt, you separate the good from the bad. So the question is, which side will you be on? On the good side or on the bad side? Zacha, soid after l'chaim. Loi zacha, then the Torah is going to smelt you. The Torah is going to do a birur. But God forbid, soid aftoi lemisa. Weiter, says the Gemara, it says Yiras Hashem, that the fear, the awe of God, Tahira, is pure. This is what endures forever. This refers dafka to someone who learns Torah in a state of purity. That Torah will remain forever. And what's pshat state of purity? Married. Ma'hi noise isha and varchakach loime Torah. Because the living in a marriage, right, is the best setting which keeps a person away from sin. So a person can do a lot of Torah, but then they can taint it with certain misbehaviors, and this is the best setting which enables us through our choice to learn Torah b'Torah. When it says weiter in the pasuk Edus Hashem ne'emana, that the testimony of Hashem is trustworthy. Amar Rabbi Chia bar Abba, that means that ne'emenes hilohoyid biloim deha, that the Torah itself that we learned will testify to God whether we fulfilled what we learned. Wow. We're coming back over here to the Big Day Kohon again. It's all connected together because we're speaking about observance, Maise, and we're speaking about Begadim, Machshava Dibero Maise. Now we find we find different expressions when it comes to the making of the Begadim. Sometimes the Torah uses the words Ma'asei Roikem. Roikem means the work of a embroiderer. Now this Ma'aseh Roikem is written when it came to make the Masach. The Masach was like a screen. When you entered the Mishkan, you also entered the Mishkan from east to west. So the curtains that surrounded it didn't fully surround it, and there was like a door. Maybe Kevin will find a picture. It went from the west, it went north and south, it even turned around a little bit in the east, but a big part of it was opened. But we didn't want to leave everyone walking out in the midbar to see in. It's not modest. So in front of it, they would put a big screen, so you would enter from either side of the screen. So when the Torah speaks about the making of the screen, it's called Maisei Roikim, the work of an embroiderer. When it comes to making the Mishkan, if you remember, we already learned there are many coverings, a machlokes, 3 coverings or 4 coverings to the Mishkan. We're speaking here about the lowest covering, the one that was also the ceiling, because when you went into the Mishkan, you would look up, you would see the lower part of the closest covering to the Mishkan. That covering was called Maisei Choyshev. We had that on Amud Aleph today, but that's called the work of a designer. A designer can also mean someone who paints. So was it embroidered or was it designed? A contradiction. So Amar Rabbi Elazar, that it's, even though you can answer, well, the Masach was Maaseh Roikem, and the covering of the Mishkan was Maaseh Choshev. He's saying no, that they were all both Roikem and Choshev. What's Pshat? First, Sheroikem b'makim shechoshvin. First, you would have designers that would make a design. They would draw the pictures. Rashi writes, you had an Ari, you had a Nesher. they would draw it. And that helped the embroiders to embroider on top of the design. Not many people who saw people doing needlework, that's what they see. So you have already, if you want to know what color thread you should use here and there, so the material that you're using with the holes, have the design first. However, there is a braisa that doesn't reconcile it the way Rabbi Elazar reconciles it. No, it's not that they're all the same and they all first were designed and then they were embroidered. No, some of them were dafka ma'aseh roikim and some of them were dafka ma'aseh choshev, and they're two different things. Tana mishmei Rab Nechemia, when the Torah uses the words roikim to embroidered, that means ma'aseh machat, it was needlework. Lefikach, therefore, partzuv echad, there was one image or one mirror image. We'll learn the way Rashi explains. Since they used needlework to make a design, so if you make a design of a lion, when you do ma'aseh roikim, so there'll be a lion apparent from both sides. It's going to be a mirror image, because it's going to be the reverse, but it's going to be the same image, the same threads that make a line, the same threads make a line. That's called ma'aseh roikim. Ma'aseh choshev means a lot more wisdom went into it. It means that they made a design, but they made a design in a way where from this side came out the lion, from that side came out the eagle. Wow. Ma'aseh choshev, it was through weaving, and the advantage of weaving is lefikach shnei partzufos. It was not a mirror image, it was complete two different images for one side and the other. Perhaps that's ein toichei kebarei. Maybe al pi chasidus. In other words, the outside has to be better than the inside by a non-tzaddik, because we're talking not tzaddikim. Weiter. Let's happen just to start the sugya. So when the Mishnah said that only when the Kohen Gadol was wearing the Shmonim Begadim, only then were we allowed to ask him to consult the Urim V'Tumim, then the Mishnah said, for what? That will be, God willing, tomorrow. But so normally we have a Kohen Hedyot, Kohen Gadol. Who were the Shmonim Begadim? Only the Kohen Gadol. Comes Rav Dimi with a big chiddush. Ki Yosef Rav Dimi came from Eretz Yisrael. He also brought Pekalach. Amani says, that even the Begadim should Kohen Gadol Mishamash Mehem. The same begadim that was worn by the Kohen Gadol, the Shmonim Begadim, those same begadim, even the Mashuach Melchama, someone who was anointed to lead us in battle, right, Shema Yisrael, he would give those inspiring talks, he also wore Shmonim Begadim. And how do we know that? Because since it says in Tetzaveh, second to last line, Ubigdei HaKodesh Asher La'aron Yiu Lebanav Acharav, the words Acharav are mamish extra. The begadim for Aaron, the Kohen Gadol, should be for his sons. Of course, the sons come after the father. Achrav means it should also be worn by the one who is not on the same level of Aaron HaKohen. He's Achrav, meaning lower, but he's not a Kohen Hedyot. Who is that? The Mashuach Mulchama. Let me show up with Achrav, and God willing to be continued, we're going to challenge the Shita tomorrow.